And the process started as follows. South Texas actually runs from El Paso to San Antonio, and then east to Houston, and then everything down. And as I said, 90% of the 1 million Mexicans that lived in Texas lived in South Texas. And there have been efforts in the past to bring Mexican Americans to the polls. And they were successful, except what we had in South Texas were political bosses. These political bosses would pay for the poll tax of these Mexican Americans and generally take them to the polls. First they have a barbecue for the Mexicans, and then take them to the polls, and they would vote en masse for these political bosses. And these political bosses were Democrats, but they were conservative Democrats. They were basically the heel that was on their back. So labor in Texas decided to break this tension, this political tension, this reality there in South Texas. And what it did was that it permitted this organization called the Latin American Committee to be formed within the Texas AFL-CIO. Now, it should have been the Mexican American Committee of the Texas AFL-CIO, but the word Mexican is a pejorative term in Texas. That's why the Texas Mexicans call themselves Latin Americans. It sounds more exotic, more over there, and more in unity, of course, with America's policy with regard to Latin America. And this paper that I'm doing is really about this effort on the part of the Texas AFL-CIO to bring out large numbers of Mexican Americans to the voting booth. And it crystallizes with the campaign in 1963 there in Crystal City, Texas, there in South Texas. And Crystal City was emblematic of South Texas. 90% of the people well below the poverty rate. A lot of them illiterate, both in Spanish and English. And then, of course, the rule by the Texas Rangers in South Texas. I was telling Paul over lunch, I grew up in Texas. There, I'm from Crystal City. And my mama had a way, if I was bad, she would say, you better obey me or Captain Alley's going to get you. I'm giving you an English translation. Captain Alvin Alley was with the Texas Rangers for 38 years. And his district, or his jurisdiction, if you will, was South Texas. So that was one of the scariest stories I heard of as a little kid. If I didn't behave, my mom said that Captain Alley would get me. And in retrospect, I kind of laugh at that it was very real. It was very much of the reality of South Texans. This intervention, if you will, not occasionally, but also the Texas Rangers acting as agent provocateurs, just being around, looking for any excuse, right, to lay in on the Mexican Americans of South Texas. Well, here comes Crystal City, 1963, and there's already a schism within the Democratic Party. The Mexican Americans were burned. They were burned during the Kennedy presidential election. They formed Viva Kennedy clubs all across the United States. And it was the vote, along with the African American vote, but it was the vote in South Texas that really won Texas for John Kennedy. And we know that Kennedy was no friend of the minority. He was very conservative with respect to civil rights, interested more in foreign relations. So what the Mexican Americans did, they formed an alternate political party called the Political Association of Spanish-Speaking Organizations, or PASO. It was Mexican American, but it was also, it could be considered all Latino, because there were Cuban Americans, Puerto Ricans, who, of course, had organized in support of Kennedy, and now were members of PASO. And this is how they took Crystal City. And then things in South Texas really start to fall apart, because Barry Goldwater is in town. The conservative Republican, out of Arizona. He considers Texas a pivotal state. And he has organizers in South Texas, Mexican Americans organizing for the Republican Party, even though Goldwater is very, very against civil rights. He's also anti-labor. Nonetheless, Mexican Americans have been hoodwinked too many times to continue to embrace the Democratic Party.